Welcome to the first of two video lectures on Homer's epic poem, the Odyssey. This first video lecture is going to cover books 8 and 9 of the Odyssey, and the second one will cover books 10 and 11. So in the two video lectures, we are only looking at the middle part of the Odyssey, not the whole thing. This middle part is often referred to as Odysseus's Great Wanderings, or the Great Wanderings. And it's the most exciting, most fun part of the story. So we're going to focus on that, what happens to Odysseus as he tries to make his way home, starting with books 8 and 9, and then into 10 and 11. Okay, so today's learning objectives for this first video lecture. Students will define and analyze Greek notions of xenia and nostos. In our discussion of the Iliad, we've already defined xenia as a type of hospitality, though more complicated than that. Today we'll add nostos to our list of Greek terms that we are familiar with. Nostos loosely translates to homecoming, going home, getting to go home, Odysseus' great journey home. We're going to continue to look at examples of Homeric simile. We are going to also identify and analyze meta-narrative elements that Homer employs through the character of Demodocus and also through the character of Odysseus. So when I talk about meta-narrative, I'm talking about a story within a story. The ways in which the layering of, we've got a story being told by a storyteller within a story. When we get to Shakespeare, we'll see plays within a play as well. We see that in Midsummer Night's Dream, we see it in Hamlet, we see it elsewhere in Shakespeare too, right? Where these stories get embedded within one another, and it's a really, really cool narrative thing that Homer does in the Odyssey. And then students will recall key characters, events, and themes from books 8 and 9 of Homer's Odyssey. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump into our text. We are skipping over books 1 through 7, as I mentioned originally at the beginning of the video lecture. I've included here a very brief summary of what happens in books 1 through 7. Books 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all about Odysseus' son, Telemachus, and about what's happening back at home in Ithaca. Oh, and it's important to note, too, we're talking about a point in time 10 years after the Trojan War ended. So we're jumping forward 10 years, and at the moment, we don't know what's happened in those 10 years, but the Odyssey is going to fill in all those blanks. Remember, we left off at the end of book 24 of the Iliad. Achilles had just given the body of Hector back to his father, to Priam, and there was a big funeral, a long funeral, and then the Iliad just ended. So we didn't get to see the end of the Trojan War there. So that part gets skipped. But the Odyssey is going to fill in the ending as well, of how the Greeks won the war. So anyway, 10 years after the end of the Trojan War, books 1 through 4 are about Telemachus, Odysseus' son, and what's happening back at home, in Odysseus' home on Ithaca. And a bunch of suitors, over 100 different men, are all trying to marry Odysseus' wife, Penelope. And that's not okay. That's a real violation. They're committing a violation of xenia. So many problems with what they're trying to do. So that's in books 1 through 4. And we'll hear references to that very briefly. And at the end, the ending that we're skipping, it comes back to that. There's a bit of a bookend effect when Odysseus gets back to Ithaca and has to deal with those suitors. And that's the part of the story it's a wonderful story, but we're, for the sake of time, not diving as deeply into that. Now, book 5 is where we actually get to Odysseus 10 years later. And we find him on this island alone. Well, not alone. He's with a goddess named Calypso. And he's been there for 8 years, stuck there for 8 years. Calypso wants to marry him. She loves him. She adores him, the sea goddess. But Odysseus just wants to get home to Penelope. That's all he cares about. And so finally in book 5, Zeus orders Hermes to go to Calypso and say, you've got to set Odysseus free. In fact, it's his Moira. We've talked about that term before. It's his fate or his lot that he gets to return home. And Zeus will not change that. Hermes will not change that. Calypso will not change fate. You can't change fate, even if you are a god. So finally, Calypso helps Odysseus build a raft. And he sails away. He's stuck on the water for a very long time, lots of storms. Poseidon makes it horrible for him. Poseidon does not like Odysseus. Athena loves Odysseus. Poseidon hates Odysseus, and we're going to find out why. That's coming up in book 9. So he ends up naked and almost dead, gets washed up on this beach, and there's a young princess who finds him there and saves him. Her name is Nausicaa, and we're going to see her very briefly here in books 8 and 9 as well. And she saves him. She falls in love with him too and wants to marry him. We'll hear. But Odysseus he is determined to get home, to have his Nostos, his homecoming, and get back to Penelope. So that's another threat to his homecoming. And we're going to see lots of threats to his Nostos, to his homecoming. And it's a relatively gentle threat. Nausicaa doesn't want to hurt him. Calypso didn't want to hurt him. But it is a threat to the homecoming, right? And then in book 7, Athena cloaks Odysseus in a mist, leads him to the Phaeacian palace, and there he meets the king and the queen, Queen Arete, queen of the Phaeacians, and Alcinous, king of the Phaeacians. And that's where we start with book 8. So they provide him Xenia. Remember, Xenia is when you have a guest come to your home. You have to allow them to stay. And we open book 8 with that. So I'm going to take about 40 minutes total with this first video lecture. So I'm going to take approximately, 15, 20 minutes with book 8, and then another 15, 20 minutes with book 9, walking you through the events of these. Now remember, the idea in the video lecture is that you've already read book 8 and book 9. We're going to come back to it through the video lecture. But if you haven't already read book 8 and book 9, pause the video lecture now. Take an hour, however long it takes you to read 2 books, or remember 2 chapters of the Odyssey. I would guess most people about an hour to read through those, and then come back to this point in the video lecture. Okay, so the assumption is that you've read through this and have a sense of it already, but we're going to analyze and go deeper now. Okay, so book 8 opens up. We've got Athena, and Athena, like I said before, she's on Odysseus' side. And she pours unearthly charm upon his head and shoulders, and she made him taller and sturdier, so these Phaeacians would welcome and respect him. So she makes them. She's again, just like we saw Apollo interfere back in the Iliad in the battle, and we saw Aphrodite interfere, saving Paris, saving him from the duel with Menelaus. Just like we saw that, Athena's here, helping out her favorite as well. All right, so let's scroll down just a little bit, and we get this is when the people were assembled. Alcinous addressed them. So the king says to the people, "This foreigner, I do not know his name," and that's an important tenet of Xenia. It is wrong in Greek culture. When a stranger comes to your door, you don't start by asking, "What's your name?" And what's your parentage, and who are you? You don't start there. You start with a welcome. Welcome into my home. Here is food and clothing and a bed and a warm, safe place to be. The implication, if you say, "What is your name?" is that, well, if you don't give me the right name, if you're not the right person, I might not give you Xenia. And that's not in the spirit of Xenia. That's not in the spirit of welcoming someone into your home. So you don't start by saying, "What's your name?" So Alcinous has not done that. And he's reminding everybody, I've not asked his name. I've done the right thing that Zeus demands. I do not know his name. He came wandering from west or east and showed up at my house. He begs and prays for help to travel on. And just like a good Xenos, a good host, let us assist him, as we have before with other Xenos, other guests. No visitor has ever been forced to linger in my house. We always give them safe passage home. And so he's going to now, he starts right away. Odysseus, he doesn't know it's Odysseus. He doesn't know who is in his home. But he says, whoever this is, we're going to help him get home, right? Now this is a great part, and I talked about in the learning objectives, thinking about the meta-narrative story within a story element. We've had lots of that, lots of examples of that. In the Iliad, there's lots of other examples in the Odyssey. But one of the loveliest examples that we get in all of epic is the character Demodocus, who is a blind bard who lives in Phaeacia, and he is sent for by Alcinous, the king, to come and sing for Odysseus and well, they have this big banquet and feast, and it's quite lovely. We get this moment too, and in many ways, what Homer is doing with this character Demodocus is that it's a self-portrait, because rumor, the legend is that Homer was a blind bard, right? And he was gifted with the ability to tell stories, to sing stories, but he could not see. And we're going to see that throughout Greek mythology as well, and other places too. People who are blind get some sort of extra power. So we'll actually get to that in the next video lecture when we meet Tiresias. But that's to come. I'll hold off on that. So the houseboy brought the poet whom the muse adored. She gave him two gifts, good and bad. She took his sight away, that's the bad gift, but gave sweet song. I'm going to pause for just a moment, and I want to share with you an image that's quite famous. This is a painting by an artist named William Adolphe Bouguereau, and he painted this in 1874. And you can see here, this is a painting of Homer, and he's blind, but notice how his holds his chin up, right? And there's a pride that we see in Homer, and he is being led by a young shepherd boy. And this is there's a lot of paintings and sculptures of Homer, the blind bard, being led by a boy, right? So we could also just as easily imagine this to be Demodocus coming to sing the stories for Odysseus, right? Okay, so Odysseus, with his strong hands, at line 84, picked up his heavy cloak of purple, covered up his face. He was ashamed to let them see him cry, right? So when he starts hearing Demodocus sing about the Trojan War, it brings tears to us. It makes him weep. Now, no one sees him weeping, except the king who's sitting next to him, the Phaeacian king Alcinous. So it says only Alcinous could see his tears since he was sitting next to him, and he heard his sobbing. So he stops Demodocus and says, okay, let's stop storytelling for a little while. This is very emotional for this guest of mine. Let's stop doing this. And let's have some sports. And they sort of hold a little mini Olympics. Now, we actually have a little mini Olympics that happens in the Iliad as well. Now, we didn't cover that in our video lectures. We jumped over that. That was in book 23. If you remember, we did book 22 and then skipped 23 and went to 24. But in book 23, if we had read that, Achilles hosts a miniature Olympics in honor of Patroclus as part of his funeral rites. And here we have Alcinous holding a little mini Olympics, again, in honor of his guest as a way to entertain him. So we find out at the little mini Olympics, these games, we get a foot race, we get wrestling, we get jumping, we get discus throwing, and we get boxing. And so Alcinous and Odysseus and all the older noblemen watch as the younger noblemen partake in these sports. All right. Then we get one of these young noblemen, Euryalus, taunts Odysseus a little bit at this point. And he says, why aren't you playing in these games? And remember, Athena made him really look strong and powerful. And he says, you look like an athlete. Why would you like to join us, right? But in a kind of taunting way. I suppose you must be ignorant of all athletics. You are no athlete, Euryalus says to Odysseus as he watches the games. And this is offensive to Odysseus. Odysseus cares deeply about his kleos, his reputation, and what will be remembered about him after he dies, right? And he's angry about this. And he says back to Euryalus, you look impressive, and a god could not improve your body. So yeah, you have the physical characteristics of a good man, but your mind is crippled. You have stirred my heart to anger with these outrageous comments. And keep in mind that the games in ancient Greek culture are sort of like, being a good athlete is precursor to being a good warrior. So to look at someone and say you don't look like much of an athlete is looking at them and saying you don't look like much of a warrior. And in Greek culture, that's a pretty serious insult. So Odysseus jumps up, he grabs a discus, and we've already had all the younger men have thrown the discus, and someone's been declared champion. He picks it up, and he throws it further than anyone else had thrown one, right? And then he boasts. He says, I am not weak at any sport men practice. I know the way to hold a polished bow. I was always the first to hit my man out of a horde of enemies. So he's bragging about his skills in archery, right? At Troy, when the Achaeans, the Greeks, another word for the Greeks, shot their bows, the only one superior to me was Philoctetes. And we are going to meet Philoctetes. He gets his own play a little bit later in the semester. So tuck that name away and remember Philoctetes. But the reason Philoctetes is better at archery than Odysseus, there's only one reason why he's better, because he has a magic bow. It actually used to be Hercules' bow. So back in the day, Philoctetes was friends with Hercules. When Hercules died, Philoctetes ends up with the bow, and it's a magic bow, and whenever it shoots, it cannot miss. You cannot miss with this magic bow. You don't have to be good at archery. So, of course, Odysseus is not as good as Philoctetes because he doesn't have a magic bow. He just has a regular bow, right? Keep in mind, too, Odysseus hasn't told his name yet, but to an observant looker-on at this banquet, he just gave away an important piece of information, which maybe he shouldn't have. He's a little bit angry, right, at what Euryalus has said to him, and he says, I'm the second best archer of the Greeks. And Greeks had heard all the stories of the Trojan War, and somebody surely is saying, oh, I know who the second best archer is. I know Philoctetes is best. The second best was Odysseus. And surely there's somebody in Alcinous, maybe the king, maybe Arete, the queen. Somebody who's there listening is like, wait a minute, I think I just figured out who he is. And that's a slip on the part of Odysseus. He doesn't usually make strategic mistakes. That's his specialty. But he's tired. He's not. His mind maybe isn't as sharp as it was. And when he gets angry, he makes mistakes. And that's going to be important in Book 9, too. When he gets angry and emotional, he makes mental mistakes. He's not perfect in his strategic ability. All right, so anyway, Alcinous kind of quiets everyone down at this point. Says, okay, you threw the discus, and you were great, and clearly Euryalus needs to apologize for what he said. Let's bring Demodocus back out and have him sing for us again. All right, let's call the games done. All right, Euryalus and Odysseus, or the guest. We don't know who. We know who it is, but the Phaeacians don't know who it is. Yeah, they don't know it's Odysseus, right? Let's stop the games and bring Demodocus back. So let someone bring the well-tuned lyre from inside for Demodocus. Go quickly. So spoke the king, and the houseboy brought the lyre. And so we get Demodocus, the poet, strummed and sang. And remember, this is all commentary. Homer's making self-commentary about the very nature of this kind of oral tradition. Remember, this wasn't written down. People were hearing this story, and they were hearing Homer sing about a bard named Demodocus. So this is the meta-narrative, that idea of a story within a story. And meta-narrative has this cool ability to then comment about the very act of storytelling or story writing in really cool ways. Anyway, so Demodocus tells a myth that you might be aware of. He sings a song about Aphrodite and Ares. So Aphrodite is the most beautiful of the goddesses, right? And all the other gods wanted to marry her. And in order to bring peace to everyone, it was decided she would marry Hephaestus. And Hephaestus is the only ugly god. He's the blacksmith god. Super strong, super smart, pretty good god as gods go. Theos, remember Theos, our Greek word for gods. But he is not good looking, is the idea. And he walks with a limp, is the idea as well. So physically, he's still a god, and he still has immense strength, but he's not like Hermes in the sense that he's really fast, right? He's not gifted in that way. He walks very slowly, with his injured leg. And there's stories about how he got his leg injured, which we're not going to dive into in this video lecture. Anyway, so Hephaestus and Aphrodite, the least pretty god to the most beautiful god, we marry them, and that's the answer to the problem. Well, Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite have a thing. And anyway, I'm not going to tell the whole myth. You can read it here. But Hephaestus catches them in a net. And he won't let them go until Poseidon tells Hephaestus, hey, come on, let them go, please. And promises that Ares will make up for what he's done to shame Hephaestus, right? So this is the song, the first song that Demodocus sings. And it goes on a couple of pages, right? And then we go on. And we get to a point here, line 387. Hear me, Phaeacian leaders, lords, and nobles. This is Alcinous, the king, talking. The stranger seems extremely wise to me, so let us give him gifts. And that's what you do. That's part of Xenia. You give gifts to your guest. And then the idea, too, is that the guest should give you gifts in return. You exchange gifts. And that's part of the process. And this is just continuing that idea of Xenia, all right? We get Nausicaa again, and she comes and talks to Odysseus. Remember, she would like to, she is a young princess of marrying age, and Athena had made Odysseus look godlike and appear godlike, and here he is. He seems very wise, and Nausicaa thinks she'd like to marry him, but that's not to be. And that's if we were doing some of the earlier books, we'd spend more time on that conversation and that threat to Odysseus' homecoming, how it lines up to Calypso too, which we also have glossed over in the earlier books, right? These beautiful women who are willing to make Odysseus their husband if he'll just forget about Penelope, but he won't. He needs his Nostos. He needs to go home, right? And here we get a nice meta-narrative moment. Odysseus says, "Go take this meat and give it to Demodocus. The muse has taught them how to sing. She loves the race of poets." And that's a nice little moment where Homer is reminding his own audience, hey, when it comes time to pay the poets, give them extra food, treat them well. The gods love poets. And it's just a nice meta-narrative moment, right? Okay. And then here we get more of it, right? Odysseus says, "You are wonderful, Demodocus. I praise you more than anyone." And then he says, "Sing the story about the wooden horse." Now, the Iliad didn't have that, but the Odyssey, we get the ending of it. And most of us have heard this before. Odysseus comes up with an idea. They pretend, the Greeks pretend to leave their camps and go home, but really a bunch of their soldiers have hidden inside of a hollow horse. The other ones are hiding just out of sight. They sailed away just maybe a few miles. And then when the horse gets hauled behind those great Trojan walls that Poseidon and Apollo built, out come the Greek men in the middle of the night, open the gates up, let the other Greeks in, and Troy falls. Troy is destroyed. And Odysseus says, "Hey, do you know that one? Can you sing that song?" And he does. Demodocus sings that song, and it brings Odysseus to tears. And he cries. Here's a nice Homeric simile. He cries like a woman who has been taken into slavery. And that's a really interesting comparison, thinking about his pain that he feels at hearing this story, the same as a woman collapsing upon a lost soldier, her lost husband. And I'm reminded back in the Iliad, we met Andromache, and she was afraid this would happen to her. And indeed, we will find out it has. There's a couple of Greek plays about Andromache. We're not reading them in this class, but you can read them on your own, that go on about what happens to Andromache afterward, and it's horrible. It's horrible what happens to the women, the Trojan women, after the war. And here Odysseus is interestingly connects himself with her, and with not just her specifically, but these women. Hecuba is another example, too, we met in the Iliad, of a woman who will be dragged off into slavery. And here Odysseus melts into tears. And it's just interesting that the Homeric simile says, as a woman weeps, as she falls to wrap her arms around her husband. It just feels like a reference to Andromache and losing Hector to me, or Hecuba losing Hector. All right. Anyway, at this point, Alcinous realizes that his guest is crying again because of Demodocus' songs about the Trojan War, and he stops. And he says to him, "Finally, I've given you food, I've given you entertainment, I've done all the things of Xenia. I can ask your name now. It's been long enough." And he does. Alcinous says to Odysseus, "What did your parents name you? With what name are you known to your people?" And he asks him, "Tell me of the country, your people, your city," so he can take him home. And then he says, "Tell me about your wanderings." And that's where we get the name of the Great Wanderings for books 8, 9, 10, and 11. Really, it's books 9, 10, and 11 that are the Great Wanderings. This just sort of sets them up for us. Describe the places, the people, and the cities you've seen. And please explain why you were crying, sobbing your heart out when you heard him sing what happened to the Greeks at Troy. The gods devised and measured out this devastation to make a song for those in times to come. And another meta-narrative piece. We've seen this before in the Iliad, right? The times to come are ours. 21st century, we are sitting here hearing the story of Odysseus, right? It's like looking through time right directly at us and say, hey, these stories are told for you. And then he says, did you lose somebody at Troy? And here's the thing we need to realize about Odysseus, and this is what we're going to get this is the meat of books 9, 10, and 11, or I think is the meat of it, right? Odysseus is completely alone of all the men from Ithaca who sailed. He's the king of Ithaca. He took 12 ships filled with men to the Trojan War. At this point, they're all dead. He's lost them all. So when he said, did you lose somebody at Troy? He didn't just lose somebody. He lost everybody. So yes, he's in tears. Yes, he is traumatized. We would call it something, PTSD. He is traumatized by war at this point, and hence why he makes some of the mental mistakes, perhaps, that he makes too. Maybe that, But yeah, did you lose somebody at Troy? That's a powerful line to me, and Odysseus is going to answer that question, and he's going to tell them, I lost everybody, and that's what books 9, 10, and 11 are about. All right, so let's jump right to book 9. I'm going to take the next 15 minutes or so and walk through book 9. This is the most famous book of the Odyssey because we're going to meet the Cyclops, Polyphemus. So we're going to have Odysseus. He gives his name. I am Odysseus, Laertes' son, known for many clever tricks and lies. My fame extends to heaven. I love that line. My fame, my kleos, extends to heaven. Even the gods talk about me, and they do. We're kind of skipping over some of the parts, but Athena and Zeus talk about Odysseus way back in book 1 of the Odyssey, right? And then he says, as you know, divine Calypso held me in her cave. So now we're going backwards. So remember, I said at the beginning of this, you've got to imagine the Trojan War lasted for 10 years, and now it's been another 10 years. So 20 years total have passed. But now we're kind of rewinding on the timeline. He says, so when I left, Calypso kept me a prisoner 8 of those years. So a lot of the story is sort of about the first 2 years. So you got this big timeline. You got 10 years for the Trojan War. We got 2 years we're going to talk about of all this adventuring. And then 8 years where he's just stuck with Calypso on this island. And now he's with Alcinous. And Alcinous is going to be the one who helps him get home finally. So he mentions, first of all, he ran into a group of people called the Cicones in Ismarus, and he sacks their city. But they're able to fight back. They call some of their neighbors, they fight back, and many of his men die. 6 well-armed members of my crew died from each ship. So he's got 12 ships at this point. He lost 6 men from each ship on his very first sort of stop, where he tried to pillage and get himself some time, some prize war, the prizes of war, time. Time is more complicated than just the prizes of war, but trying to get himself some of that what we might call booty, pirate booty, right? He's trying to get it, and he loses a bunch of his men. It doesn't go well. And then he comes to a really interesting group of people. So 10 days later, he lands on the island of those who live on food from lotus flowers. So this is a very small part of the Odyssey, but it's really important. The lotus eaters have these flowers, and they just shared them with some of their men. He sent some of his men out to scouts, and the lotus eaters just shared them with their sweet, delicious fruit. The lotus eaters aren't going to hurt them. They're not going to hurt anyone. As Odysseus' men ate it, they lost the will to come back and bring news to me. They wanted only to stay there, feeding on lotus with the lotus eaters. And the lotus eaters are a symbol of addiction, especially in the 21st century, and how easily we can slip in as humans, slip into addiction. And throughout Greek myth, I think we get all these echoes of what it means to be human. And I think most of us, in our lives at some point, are touched by addiction, whether it's ourselves who in some way have some sort of an addiction problem, or our lives are touched by knowing somebody who is affected by addiction. It's a human thing, and the Greeks were talking about it here too. And Odysseus is smart enough at this point, we got to get out of here, because if we eat the lotus flowers, we'll never want to leave. They are instantly addictive, and you don't care about going home anymore. You don't care about your nostos, right? Next, he comes to the land of the Cyclopes, and this is the most famous scene of the Odyssey. You've got to know this scene. And if anyone ever asks, have you read the Odyssey, and they're going to ask you, what did you think of Polyphemus and the Cyclops? So the Cyclopes live in caves on lofty mountain tops. They have no ships, no shipwright who can build them ships, so they're sort of just stuck on their island. These are huge, huge men. I'm gonna show you a painting of one of them here at the end. And so they go out. Odysseus lands on this island of the Cyclopes, and there's this nice long description of them. and he told my loyal crew to guard the ship, and he went out with 12 of his chosen men, his favorites. And he took a goat skin full of dark, sweet wine with him, and he goes out to explore the island of the Cyclopes. And we're at the cave. He comes to Polyphemus's caves. Polyphemus, though, isn't home when he gets there. So he goes inside, looks at everything. We saw his crates weighed down with cheese and pens crammed full of lambs. So the Cyclopes raise sheep, right? And my crew begged, let us grab some cheese and quickly drive the kids and lambs. Let's steal all this stuff and let's get out of here, right? And that would have been the better choice, but I refuse. I hope to see him. Odysseus hoped to see Polyphemus and find out if he would give us gifts. So we ate some of their cheese, and they sat down in the cave until he comes home, right? Big mistake. So he comes in, he brings all of his goats inside his cave with him, Polyphemus does. He lifts the heavy stone and set it to block the entrance of the cave. It was a rock so huge and massive, 22 strong carts could not have dragged it from the threshold. And then, after he's got them locked in the cave with him, Polyphemus says, strangers, who are you? Where did you come from across the watery depths? And if you remember what I said about Xenia a few minutes ago, the first rule of Xenia is you don't start the conversation by saying, what's your name? This is not a guy who follows Zeus's rules, right? This is a guy who does not follow the rules of Xenia. And Odysseus, everybody, any Greek would realize immediately, this is bad. This is not a guy who's going to welcome guests into his home. So he spoke, his voice so deep and booming, and his giant size made our hearts sink in terror. So Odysseus tries to play the game. He tries to play the Xenia game, because he thought he wanted gifts. So he says, now we beg you, here at your knees, to grant a gift. And remember, he brought the wine as his gift. He brought a gift too. He's playing by the rules, as is the norm for hosts and guests. And that word in Greek was xenos, X-E-N-O-S. And it's the same word for both hosts and guests. It's anyone who's part of a guest-host relationship. They are called the xenos, X-E-N-O-S, and Xenia, X-E-N-I-A, the concept that we're talking about. It says, please, sir, my lord, respect the gods. And remember, Zeus is the god of Xenia, the one in charge of hospitality. Polyphemus doesn't care about Zeus. Unmoved, he said, well, foreigner, you are a fool, or from some very distant country. You order me to fear the gods? My people think nothing of that Zeus with his big scepter, nor any god. Our strength is more than theirs. Which is interesting, because Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon. He's the son of a god. But yet he has no respect for any god except his father. And he doesn't even mention that here, that he respects his own father. All right, and all of a sudden, Polyphemus reaches down, and this is quite graphic, and he grabs 2 of Odysseus' men. So remember, Odysseus came with 12 of his men. He grabs 2 of them. This is really gross. He knocked them hard against the ground like puppies. Ooh, that is cruel. And the floor was wet with brains. He ripped them limb by limb to make his meal, and ate them like a lion on the mountains devouring flesh. There's a Homeric simile for us. Polyphemus is being compared to a lion eating the flesh of its prey. Ugh. And then it just devouring flesh, entrails, and marrow bones, and leaving nothing. Watching this disaster, we wept. Oh my gosh. Imagine being trapped in the cave with this monster with 12 other of your men, right? And 2 of you just got killed this way. They're locked in there. No one can move that rock. So they waited out. And he knows he can't kill. This is important too. He thinks about trying to fight Polyphemus, kill him while he sleeps, right? But that would have doomed us all. I realized that we were too weak to move the mighty stone he set in the high doorway. So they just have to wait there till dawn while this giant monster sleeps. Well, dawn appears, and immediately when he wakes up, he grabs 2 more men. He started with 12. He had 2 for dinner. Now he's got 2 more for breakfast. And then he takes his sheep out, puts the rock back in place, so the remaining, what would it be, 8 men. Odysseus and 8 of his men are left. And Odysseus makes a plan. And there's a giant big club, which he cuts it. Odysseus cuts it and makes it very sharp at the end. He says they sharpened up the tip and made it hard in the blazing flame here. And then, so he gets this big spike ready, this big, huge spike stick, and he's going to blind Polyphemus. He's only got one eye. He's going to drive the stick through his eye while he sleeps and blind him and escape that way. So but he won't kill him, because if he kills him, they can't move the rock. So at evening, Polyphemus, drove back his woolly flocks, brings the sheep back into the spacious cave, right? Picked up and placed the stone to form a door. He does his chores, and when they're done, he grabs 2 more men for dinner. Odysseus came with 12. This is men number 5 and 6 being eaten. He's got half of his men left, Odysseus and 6 of his best men. And at this point, Odysseus comes forward and he offers him the wine. And he says, "Here, Cyclops, you have eaten human meat, now drink some wine. Sample the merchandise our ship contains. I brought it as a holy offering, so you might pity me and send me home. But you are in a cruel rage, beyond what anyone could bear. Do you expect more guests, Xenos, 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 when you have treated us so rudely?" And then Polyphemus drinks, and he drinks, and he drinks. And he drinks all of the wine, and he gets drunk, and he passes out. And at this point, Odysseus gives his name, but he lies. He says, "Cyclops, you asked my name. I will reveal it. Then you must give the gift you promised of hospitality, of Xenia, Xenia. My name is No Man. My family and friends call me No Man." Okay, that's important. And here is Polyphemus' response. This is his Xenia that he will give. Here's the gift I'll give you. He says, "I will eat no man last. First I will eat the other men. This is my gift to you." And then he passes out drunk, right? So Odysseus and his 6 remaining men took the olive spear, its tip all sharp, and shoved it in his eye. Odysseus, remember, he's telling the story. So we kind of get lost. This is that meta-narrative idea. It's the story within the story. Now it's Odysseus telling the story. So Homer has taken on the voice, the I of Odysseus. Wonderful, wonderful. Oops, I lost my spot then. I leaned on top and twisted it, as when a man drills wood for shipbuilding. Another Homeric simile. Like a man drilling wood, he drilled the pole into Polyphemus' eye. Whirled the fire-sharp weapon in his eye. His blood poured out around the stake. And it's very gory, so right. And then the sound it makes is like when a blacksmith dips an axe into temperate and ice cold water. So imagine that hissing sound. Another example of Homeric simile here. His eyeball crackled on the spear, and horribly he howled. Very, very violent, gory book 9, but wonderful at the same time. Wonderful storytelling, but you can't help but pay attention to this, can you? Right? He tugged the spear out of his eye, all soaked with gushing blood. And then all the other Cyclops hear the screaming, and they come out of their caves and they say, "Hey, are you okay? Polyphemus, what's the matter? Are you badly hurt? Why are you screaming?" And strong Polyphemus from inside his own cave replied, "My friends, no man is killing me by tricks, not force. No man is killing me." Well, the other Cyclops hear that no man is killing you. So they say, "Oh, okay, you're fine. If no one hurts you, well, not that you're fine, but you must be either a god is hurting you, and we're not going to mess with that, or you're just sick, and there's nothing we can do about that either. We don't have medicine here. Great Zeus has made you sick. No help for that. Pray to your father, Lord Poseidon." Well, that's not very helpful. All right, so now, finally, in pain, blinded, injured horribly, he falls asleep finally. And so Odysseus and his 6 remaining men hook themselves underneath on the bellies of the sheep. And when Polyphemus wakes up, he says here, "So silently I tied them with a rope used by the giant Cyclops as a bed. I bound the rams in sets of 3 and set a man beneath each middle sheep." And then Odysseus takes the biggest ram for himself, and they all hide in these giant sheep, the fleece on the belly, tie themselves in there with rope and hide inside. It's a little bit like hiding inside the Trojan horse. It's a similar kind of idea. And that's how they make their escape. The next morning, Polyphemus wakes up, lets his sheep out, they get out, right? But Odysseus taunts him afterward. And this is maybe a mistake, but he wants his kleos. He wants to be remembered for outsmarting the Cyclops. He says, "Hey, you Cyclops idiot, the crew trapped you in your cave did not belong to some poor weakling. Well, you had it coming. You had no shame at eating your own guests." And Polyphemus grabs a giant rock and hurls it out at Odysseus and his ship. It landed right in front of him and nearly knocked him back to shore, right? The giant wave is so big. And then Odysseus makes a really big mistake. He taunts him again, and he gives him his real name. He says, Cyclops, if any mortal asks you how your eye was mutilated and made blind, say that Odysseus, the city sacker, Laertes' son, who lives in Ithaca, destroyed your sight. And so he gives away his name. And once Polyphemus has his name, he can curse him, right? I want to quickly show a little image here. This is a painting by Arnold Brocklin from 1896, and you see that this is Polyphemus throwing the rock out. All right, so once he has his name, Polyphemus curses him, curses for his father. He said, listen, Earthshaker, blue-haired Lord Poseidon, acknowledge me your son and be my father. Grant that Odysseus, the city sacker, will never go back home. Or if it is fated, that's Moira, if it's fated that he will see his family, which it is, then let him get there late and with no honor, in pain and lacking ships, and having caused the death of all his men, and let him find more trouble in his own house. And remember the suitors I talked about at the beginning, that's exactly what he'll find. This curse is going to come true for Odysseus. And that's where we leave off for book 9. Next video lecture, we pick up with books 10 and 11. Hope you enjoyed this first video lecture and introduction to the Odyssey. More coming soon.